The day the sky turned to stone began like any other in the late Cretaceous. Warm winds drifted over shallow seas, and forests were crowded with giants of every shape and size. On a quiet shore, dragonflies glittered in the sunlight as a small feathered dinosaur pecked at shellfish. That calm seemed ordinary, which made what happened next feel almost impossible to believe. I am your guide, a science communications specialist who works closely with paleontologists in the field. I spend long days studying fossils and long nights poring over field notes from ancient worlds. As we travel through time together, I will ask you to notice the smallest, most fragile details. See the way light dances across the water, and smell the resin carried on the warm air. Listen to the hush before a storm whose name no creature on earth could yet speak. High above the shore, far beyond the clouds, a stony traveler hurtled toward Earth from deep space. It was the size of a city block, moving faster than a rifle bullet could ever fly. It had crossed the cold, dark void for millions of years, its aim steady and uncheckable. It did not roar as it came, only silence, then a streak of light, then a second sun. The impact struck near what would one day become the Yucatán Peninsula on a shallow reefed platform. Rock shattered instantly, the ocean boiled, and a crater over 100 miles wide began to open. The air itself became a weapon, and shock waves tore outward at supersonic speed. Earth rang like a bell whose sound no one would ever wish to hear. If you stood within 1,000 miles, the ground would leap sideways beneath your feet. Forests would collapse as though exhaled by some unseen, unstoppable god. Farther away, a colossal wall of water surged, lifting seafloors and carving deep channels through stone. Boulders were hurled into strange places where future divers would puzzle over their impossible resting spots. We have no footage of that day, but the rocks have kept their silent testimony. We have sand grains melted into glassy droplets that rained down from an incandescent sky. We have crystals reshaped by pressures only an impact could create in a single instant. We have a thin seam rich in iridium, rare on Earth but common in meteorites. Years ago, I met a diver named Luis who explored the freshwater caves of Yucatán. He swam through blue corridors in limestone, winding like the veins of a sleeping colossus. In some shafts, the walls curved in a perfect circle far too big to see entirely. It was the hidden edge of the buried scar, carved in an instant so long ago. Luis had never expected to become part of a mass extinction story, but here he was. Another day, I stood with Dr. Maya, a paleontologist mapping ancient ecosystems in the Dakotas. She pointed to a dark clay band, barely thicker than her fingernail. "This," she said softly, "is the moment the world ended for most dinosaurs. Above it, mammals began to bloom, and birds spread their wings into a new age. Below it, the great reptiles still walked, unaware of the firestorm to come. As the debris rained back to Earth, the sky glowed like a broiler turned on everywhere. Heat pulses raced around the globe, igniting anything that could burn in their path. Some animals dove into water, others burrowed deep. A few hid in caves and shadows. The feathered tucked their heads beneath wings, the furred carried their young into the dark. They waited, and waiting meant survival in a broken and burning world. The impact itself lasted only minutes, but its shadow would stretch across years. Night came at noon, ash and sulfur dimmed the sun, and cold began to settle in. Delicate food webs snapped as plants withered, herbivores starved, and predators followed them into silence. For the first hour, there was nothing but light, heat, and deafening, relentless noise. Hundreds of miles from the crater, rivers heaved backward under the force of incoming waves. Inland channels surged, tossing sturgeon and paddlefish onto muddy banks far from the sea. In their gills, scientists later found tiny glass beads fallen from the burning sky. They stayed buried until human hands lifted them into the light and into knowledge. The first time I saw one under a microscope, it looked like a frozen raindrop. Smooth, perfect, and utterly terrifying in its quiet perfection. Hold one on your fingertip and feel the weight of a day that unstitched a world. Not every dinosaur died. Some small, beaked, feathered kinds managed to endure. They ate seeds and insects, hiding in brush through smoke and cold and hunger. From them came the birds that sing in our skies today. They threaded the needle of catastrophe, but most of their kin did not. As the first long night spread, the planet kept turning under its shroud of dust. Fires still burned, and far from the crater, life curled into burrows and hollows. They listened to stone rain and waited for the world to decide its heirs. We will visit them next, to learn what the rocks can teach about endings and beginnings, about the narrow, fragile road between loss and survival and the will to endure. When the firestorm dimmed, the cold came, and the world moved under a gray veil that turned day to dusk, and slowed the pulse of every leaf and fin and feather. Dust, soot, and sulfur rose into the stratosphere from shattered rocks and long-burning forests, scattering sunlight and starving the planet of warmth and clarity. Photosynthesis faltered, and food chains that tied leaf to herbivore to predator began to fray. The factory floor of life ran on fumes. Dr. Maya likes to say that extinction is a teacher with hard grading, and the grade book is written in mudstone and chalk, in cores pulled from ancient seafloor mud. She showed me foraminifera, tiny shell drifters, whose spirals record ancient oceans like clocks. Before the impact, their shells are diverse and baroque. At the boundary, diversity collapses to a few simple forms that endure and later rebuild. Even the smallest plankton tell the same story we find on land. Collapse, survival, recovery, a pattern repeated across basins and continents. On shore, charcoal and ash give way to a spike of fern spores, a global fern bloom that marks a botanical reset after fire. Ferns sprout fast in scarred soil and start the long rebuild toward forests. For a time, the world lowers its ceiling and opens its aisles. In that window, little feet and swift wings prosper in a patchwork of clearings, while big specialists search for vanished foods and find none, who, then, made it through. Crocodilians in water, turtles in their armor, small mammals that could eat broadly and hide, birds that could fly and peck stored seeds. It was not a test of courage. It was a test of flexibility, metabolism, and behavior. The quiet arts that rarely make movie posters. Luis, the cave diver, once surfaced in a sinkhole at noon and found the light oddly gray. Like a sheep pulled over the sun, it made him think of that ancient sky. He wrote later that the thought shrank his own worries without erasing them, the way deep time often does when we feel very small. In a Badlands museum I met Jay, a wildlife artist who grew up painting dinosaurs as bright heroes. Marching across jungles, after seeing the boundary clay and the fern spike under a microscope, Jay changed their palette to smoke, ember, and the tough green of first growth. The next mural showed soot drifting over river valleys, a mammal shielding its young at a burrow mouth, and a heron-like bird catching wind-blown seeds. Children asked where T-Rex had gone, and Jay pointed to the bird and said, "We still have dinosaurs, we just call some of them by lighter names." Science is a braid of measurements and meaning, and both matter. Numbers locate the wound, stories trace its consequences through living things. The measurements say the impact was fast, global, and chemically disruptive. Temperature plunged, rain turned acid in places, and ocean circulation wobbled. The meaning we take is that life coped by strategy more than force. Burrowing, night activity, broad diets, migration, and the discipline of dormancy. Every time I hold the jaw of a tiny Paleocene mammal, I think of human resilience. Not because we were destined, but because resilience is always local. A mother protecting a child, a flock shifting with the wind, a crocodile waiting in a slow river. These humble acts carried life forward one day at a time. There is a cliff in Italy where the boundary layer is so clean, you can slide a fingertip from Cretaceous to Paleogene in one motion and feel a history snap. My guide, a geologist named Sarah, whispered, "Careful, that is 66 million years." And we laughed and then stood quiet, measuring the line with breath. In classrooms I ask what sounds returned first after the fires. insect legs under bark, turtles plopping into water, or a bird testing a single clear note. We cannot hear them, but we can read them. Fern spores, soot, simple plankton, then more, then more. A climb toward a sky bright enough to feed leaves again. That climb is the overture to a new world. A stage cleared by catastrophe, where small actors take bold roles and large scripts are retired for a while. In the next part, we will step onto that stage and watch evolution spend its inherited capital in surprising ways, with patience and with speed. Ammonites, the coiled lords of the seas, vanish with their plankton partners. Mosasaurs and most marine reptiles go too, their hunting grounds emptied of fuel. Sharks, ancient and stubborn, keep swimming, some lines thinning, others wading through lean years until prey returns. Models and rocks agree that sunlight was throttled for months, with cool years that followed. The damage was sharp, the recovery measured. On land, seasons turned strange and long, like a clock with a sticky gear. Many animals leaned on burrows, torpor, and hoarded seeds to stay alive. When I share this with communities who live through fires and storms today, elders often nod. They know that survival is made of small, repeated choices, too. Out of the dim a new chorus rose. As skies cleared and plants returned, ecosystems rewrote themselves with smaller alphabets. That would, in time, compose new epics. Mammals expanded into fresh rooms in the ecological house. Some climbed trees, some swam, some grew long limbs for running, and some, much later, learned to shape stone and ask questions of the sky. Birds, the living dinosaurs, experimented too, turning beaks into tools and wings into strategies. In their songs, the deep past still hums on warm mornings. The world that followed was not a consolation prize. It was a reinvention, and reinvention is the superpower of life on a restless planet. Before anyone drew a crater on a map, geologists worldwide kept finding a thin, dark layer. Between Cretaceous and Paleogene rocks, a clay seam rich in iridium, rare in Earth's crust but common in meteorites. To scientists, a father and son team named Luis and Walter Alvarez proposed that an impact had dusted the globe. Other researchers tested the claim, argued, refined, and chased the signal through outcrops and cores. Years later, a geophysicist poring over oil company data saw a buried circular anomaly under the Yucatán, a scar more than 100 miles wide. Drilling and seismic images mapped a multi-ring crater and shocked minerals. So notes on the surface trace arcs like beads on a broken necklace. When I told Luis, our cave diver, about the buried rings, he nodded and said the caves had always felt like corridors in a great wheel. Dr. Maya joined a team that drilled into the peak ring of the crater. The cores they pulled were pale and strange. Rocks that had been melted, crushed, lifted, and dropped in minutes during a day of violence. Jay painted that, too, a cutaway of Earth like a theater set, with the impactor as a falling light, the oceans as curtains billowing, and life crouched in the wings waiting for its cue. I carry these scenes because they remind me that the past is not a set of dead facts, it is a mirror and sometimes a warning. The warning is simple: space is not empty, and luck is a character in every survival story. Today we track near-Earth asteroids, practice deflection, and run tabletop exercises so that a day like the one 66 million years ago will not surprise our descendants. That, too, is evolution, expressed in steel, math, and international cooperation. I once visited a school in Yucatán where a storyteller named Itzil gathered children under a ceiba tree and told a Maya tale of a night when stones rained and the birds carried fire in their beaks. Afterward, we unrolled the map and traced the hidden circle beneath their feet. And the students pressed their hands to limestone and asked whether the earth could remember. We said yes, through fossils and minerals, through chemistry and geometry, through the way water follows old fractures and names them with blue. Then the children asked who inherited the world when the sky turned to stone. I told them the truth as we now best understand it. Animals that were small, generalist, mobile, and lucky. Creatures that could wait, hide, or fly, and the plants that came back first. What mattered was not perfection, but enoughness. Enough food to reach tomorrow. Enough shelter to survive a cold night. Enough flexibility to switch a menu when the usual meal was gone. From that base, diversity climbed again. Forests grew, rivers braided and shifted. Insects rebuilt their dazzling guilds. Birds discovered new niches, from oceans to grasslands. Mammals tried on bodies and behaviors like costumes. From that radiation came primates in trees and later a lineage that would ask about its own beginning, fear its own ending, and learn to care for a planet that had endured many. I do not say this to center us in a story that is bigger than us, but to position us inside it with responsibility and humility. If a single rock falling from space could reset the world, then our choices, scaled across billions of hands, can tilt the arc of what inherits the future. So, when we talk about extinctions today, whether caused by warming seas, disappearing forests, or plastic in the bellies of seabirds, remember the boundary clay. Remember the fern spike, the soot, the small jaws that made it through, the beaks that opened to catch seeds in thin light. They are not just evidence, they are instructions. Protect corridors so beings can move. Keep options open so diets can shift. Leave refuges where the world can wait out a season of harm. Invest in watching the sky and in listening to the ground beneath our feet. This is how we braid wonder with responsibility, how we turn knowledge into shelter. On clear nights, I like to stand outside and look toward the south, imagining the buried crater sleeping under Yucatán and the reef that once shone there. I picture the little dinosaur on the shore from our first minutes together. And then I picture a wren on my fence, feathers puffed against a breeze. A survivor's descendant singing for territory and for joy. If the deep past has a message, it is not that endings are inevitable, but that survival is inventive. Life finds narrow doors when wide gates close. We found one once, as a planet, on the day the sky turned to stone. Now it is our turn to keep doors from narrowing, to leave light where others will need it, and to carry forward a world more hospitable than the one we inherited. That is a task worthy of every field notebook and every bedtime story, worthy of a diver's courage and a painter's eye and a child's sharp question. Thank you for traveling the boundary with me. May its lessons echo in your choices, and may its wonder stay bright when you look up.